money is all I care about.
Hello everyone and welcome back to a special presentation of Anime Club After Dark. I have with me tonight our chivalry of Shota Shotaro.
I keep a little blade in my fucking lip gloss kit.
And tonight we are going to be talking about episode 8 of Vinland Saga. So, some things happened in this episode. Mostly the fact that Askeladd and his troop, I guess you could say, go back home in a way. They certainly go to a friendly village. Our village is very, very friendly to them. Run by a man named Lord Gorm, which is an interesting name, to say the least. I didn't really, at first, I didn't exactly know what to make of this, except that I almost felt like I was watching a sort of a rehash of the village that Thorfinn came from. Did you get that sense too?
Well, at first I was like very surprised because knowing all the bullshit and all the fucking torture and killing and raping and burning that Askeladd and his friends do, to come back and be like, ah yes, we live in a wholesome town with all these beautiful like homely things. I'm like, what? What? And also, it is a lot like Thor's or a lot like Thorfinn's village, because especially in particular, Askeladd's relationship to this village is a lot like Thor's relationship with the Icelandic village, because they're both, you could say, savage military combatants, and they both have a strangely homely place to come back to that doesn't quite fit what actions they've been doing on the battlefield.
Yeah, and that was the thing that struck me the most. Also, unlike, or I would say like, the village that Thor's and Thorfinn came from, the younger people in this village seem to be pretty ignorant of what war is like, because there's a scene where you see one of the younger people in the village are like, yeah, I'm going to join Askeladd and become a warrior too. Like, clearly being completely ignorant of what battle and war is like.
You said similar to.
Yeah, similar to.
Yeah. That was definitely a big reason why those two things are connected in our minds, because the villagers are both ignorant of the atrocities of war,
which kind of begs the question for me, and I think for a lot of people too, is Askeladd essentially being set up to be a huge foil for Thor's?
I mean, now
because they live very similarly. Like the only real difference between them that we've seen so far is that Askeladd doesn't really have a lot of doesn't fight with honor, whereas Thor's did.
It's almost like Askeladd is an alternate version of Thor's, because Thor's was a ruthless, brutal killer before, but he changed his ways. So Askeladd could be a different version of Thor's where he didn't change his ways, or maybe Thor's is the end game of what Askeladd will become. But I definitely think that they're connected in some way, and this sort of connection that we're getting because of the similarity of their villages really makes me see Askeladd as maybe Thor's new father figure. Because you could
Do you mean Thorfinn's father figure?
Yeah, sorry. Whatever.
Okay.
They have very similar names. Because you could interpret their relationship, Thorfinn and Askeladd's relationship, as that of a mentor and a student, or, which is basically a version of father and son. So, I never thought of that before this episode, but now that the show is forcing us to view the two characters like that, I can definitely see that relationship being fatherly and paternal. And that also makes me question, what does Askeladd really think of Thorfinn? Like, how does he, like, does he actually care about him?
So
Or does
I have
he
a
not?
theory.
I
have
know.
a theory. I have a theory that Askeladd actually, in a really weird roundabout way, kind of respects Thorfinn, because I think this is purely speculation on my part. I think maybe in Askeladd's mind, he sees in Thorfinn what he could have been had he actually, had any sense of honor.
I don't think so.
I
I don't
say
think
it's a purely a theory on my part. I don't really have a whole lot to go on. I'm just basing it on just a gut instinct that I have based on some things that I've seen so far.
See, I think the show, as well as Askeladd, both portray Thorfinn's sense of honor as a weakness. I don't think Askeladd respects his sense of honor, but clearly Askeladd has not killed him.
Yeah.
And has, in a roundabout way, kept him around. So clearly Askeladd respects him in some way because he hasn't killed him and he has kept him around.
Yeah, because there's at this point, there's really nothing stopping him from killing Thorfinn. Like, there's nothing holding him back. No one's really going to come after him if he kills him at this point.
No, so he must respect him in some way, or he must have some sort of positive feelings for him in some manner.
Or he's using him as some kind of leverage in a conniving way, because we have seen that Askeladd is willing to be very conniving in his methods. So maybe he foresees Thorfinn being more useful when he gets older for something?
Maybe. Another thought is that maybe he thinks that Thorfinn will succeed him as the leader of his troop.
Maybe. Maybe he doesn't trust anyone else to succeed him.
I don't think he doesn't trust them. I think more that they're not really capable enough. And I feel like Thorfinn is like basically a war prodigy at this point, because from such a young age he was so proficient. He became so proficient at killing people. So I think Askeladd sees talent in Thorfinn, and maybe he wants to cultivate that talent to... Actually, you know what? I don't even think Askeladd cares about who's going to succeed him. Because I don't really think he cares about his troop. I think he's just using his troop, so I'm not entirely sure.
So I can tell you why I think that he's actually maybe using Askeladd for some ulterior motive, or for something else grander down the road. No.
What?
I think it's based on something that he says a little bit later in this episode, where he's talking to Lord Grom about a slave that he recently bought, and he uses this. He says this phrase because the Lord Grom is like, "Oh, that slave is so useless," and Askeladd says to him, "It's not the slave's fault that she's useless. You're just bad at using her. You can make use of anyone with the right approach." That's what makes me think Askeladd is keeping Thorfinn around for some greater purpose down the road.
Definitely. But side note, I really like that quote.
Yes.
But we don't know if that quote is going to mean that he's going to use him for purely self-interested, in like for purely in Askeladd's favor, or if he's going to use him to benefit both of them.
I would say, based on what we've seen so far about Askeladd, I'd say the former rather than the latter. Because Askeladd seems very, shall we say, self-interested.
See, that's true. But the thing is that Askeladd keeping Thorfinn around is against his character. Because overall, Thorfinn is more of a burden than a boon to the troop. So, to me, until I see a reason why he would keep him around, I can't help but think that there is more than just self-interest as to why he's keeping him around.
Maybe. That's why I keep watching. Okay. So something else. So we mentioned that this particular village that they're camped at definitely seems to be very friendly toward Askeladd, to say the least, and his troop, to say the least. But he's certainly not the leader of this village. The leader is a guy named Lord Grom, as we mentioned, and he seems to be very, very obsessed with money.
It was so funny.
To the point of him being very, I guess, well, you mentioned it here, being very camp about money.
So we mentioned mustache twirling villains in our last episode about the French commander. Well, this is also another mustache twirling villain, but not visually. Just
Yeah,
he is one. Just his personality.
He just comes off as very shady.
Not just shady. It's just so funny. It's like, I don't know what his exact line, but he's like, anything can be bought with money. Money is all I care about. The coin is the most sultry icon. Ooh.
And I know, and he says this line while basically fingering the silver coin.
I'm just like, it was a bit, much. And I don't quite see. Okay, I complained about the visual problem last episode with the deformed characterization of the villain, but I'm also not okay with this characterization.
Is it because he kind of looks like a wizard?
No, not visually. I'm not talking about visuals at all. I'm talking about his the choice of script being so direct. It's just, I'm not okay with that. It's very similar to how in the first couple episodes where we saw the leader of the village next to Thorfinn's village, who was like a slave master, who was like, everything can be chained. I chain the slaves, the law chains you. Everything is a chain. And I'm like, girl. No one says that. That's just so camp and so not believable. But yeah, so I mean, it's better than having a deformed face, but still not quite what I'm looking for from a villain.
Well, it's funny because before these last two episodes that we've talked about, there was a lot of subtlety that went on between the characters, between Thorfinn and Askeladd, and just the amount of subtlety was great. And then all of a sudden we're getting people who are like in your face antagonists. I'm like, that's not what you started with.
It's like we have different episode directors. I don't know if we do.
It is. I don't know either. I don't know who directed this episode either. I didn't look that up before we started. I probably should have. But yeah, it is almost, well, not necessarily different episode directors, but a
lot of different hands in the pot.
Different script writer, perhaps. I don't know. It just seems weird that for multiple episodes now we've had a lot of subtlety between protagonist and antagonist, and now all of a sudden we're getting this in your face, like you're supposed to hate this person because they look deformed or they act really, really shady.
It's more like they're speaking their motivations. Like, I like money instead of showing it. But it's like, I like to chain people. It's like why don't you just do it instead of saying verbally exactly your character out loud?
It's like we've been talking about with Askeladd. We don't, at the end of the day, we still don't know what his motivations are yet for why he's doing all of this. So, and it hasn't been said outright yet. So leaving the audience to guess about that is actually so much better than coming out and saying, I'm doing this for this, and this.
But like, even just have, like, if you had that scene without that line that he likes money, like, you can interpret that he likes money without
you can certainly interpret it based on how he's handling the money.
Exactly. So you don't have to tell us that, because it just comes off as you're treating the viewers as stupid.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So something else that we did get in this episode is we finally got that duel that was promised between Askeladd and Thorfinn in the previous episode. It was done, I would say, pretty well. You definitely get to see that since the last time he tried to fight Askeladd, Thorfinn has definitely improved his fighting style, like tenfold, I would say. And in fact, this time he was actually able to disarm Askeladd entirely. So that was cool.
I think that, just judging from this fight, that Thorfinn and Askeladd are even on in a combat sense.
I would say if not exactly even, very, very close to it.
Yeah. But Thorfinn doesn't end up winning, even though he did end up disarming Askeladd.
Because he let his emotions get the better of him, and that's what Askeladd wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, he said it, but I believe he said it the last time that he tried to duel him was that you can't give yourself up, or you can't give yourself up an opening just because you let your emotions get the better. That wasn't the phrase he used, but he basically said that. And he used that exact same strategy against him again, and it worked because he was basically taunting his dead father.
Which basically tells us that this is another one of Thorfinn's flaws, is that he's hung up over his father. And that's holding him back from like moving on as a character. It also shows that Askeladd is sort of afraid of Thorfinn because he was forced to play the dirty the taunting card instead of beating him with his martial skills.
Yeah. I definitely think it certainly shows a little bit of fear on Askeladd's part, because he had to resort to that in order to get Thorfinn to basically come at him full of emotion.
Yep.
I will say, I think not only is Thorfinn sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, selling himself short by still being hung up on his father, he's outwardly showing that to everyone around him that he's still hung up on it. So not only can Askeladd use this against him if he wanted to, just about anyone in Askeladd's troop or in that village now can use it against him because they've seen what it does.
Yeah, and I want to say that, like, it's a very easily remedied fault, like, girl, get over it. But also, I can, like, now that we've been with him for, like, since he was, like, a little kid and now up to now, I can understand that he's still hung over it, like, hung up on it. I find this believable, especially considering his age, that he can still be really bothered by someone insulting his father. Like, this kind of weakness we see a lot in a lot of different stories. And a lot of different stories, I'm like, girl, just get over it. Like, I don't empathize with the person. But in this particular case, I do empathize with Thorfinn because I've seen everything. So I can understand.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, getting over the death of a parent is something that takes a while no matter what age you are. So I feel like it's relatable for a lot of people as well.
But do you think, like, there's a lot of stories where you're trying to avenge your parent, and do you find just that premise by itself as a relatable idea?
Maybe not that premise by itself, but when you have emotions built up underneath of it, which we got with this adaptation, because we actually got to see the relationship between Thorfinn and his father Thors for a few episodes. There was like some emotional connection with the audience to that. There's so many stories where, in anime in particular, where it's a revenge plot, but the catalyst for the revenge plot happens in the first episode, so you don't get any time to become like emotionally or even narratively connected with the person who ends up getting killed and is being taken revenge upon.
Yeah, a lot of those stories I really can't empathize, but this one's different because we got so much time with the parent.
Yeah. I think it's definitely different this time around because of that. More anime that revolve around revenge plot should probably take note of this and, like, you don't have to kill the person who's going to die off in the first episode. You can keep them around for 2 or 3 episodes to get some kind of emotional connection between the audience and the character, which makes me all the more grateful that this adaptation was done the way it was done and didn't necessarily follow the manga one-to-one. So another great line that I think we need to bring up, which was also coincidentally uttered by Askeladd in this episode. There's a scene where there's sort of like a feast going on, and the Lord Gorm, easy for me to say, is accosting the slave girl again because she messed up, and he's basically whipping her with like an actual whip, and Askeladd points to him and says, "That man is a slave to money, and everyone's a slave to something," which is a really good point, because there's a lot of people, whether it was back then or today, who let their passions and their obsessions get the better of them.
Yeah, I really like that line in the context of the story, mostly because he was clearly referring to Thorfinn, in that, Thorfinn is a slave to the revenge he wants for his father. But I like the line more because it makes us question, if everyone is a slave to something, then what is Askeladd a slave to? Because especially since Askeladd is the one saying this line, and we know so little about Askeladd, but we know that Askeladd is like a major character, and he clearly has things he's hiding. And now, just because he said this, I'm really curious to know, what is Askeladd a slave to? It's also the way he said that. The way he's like, I watched this episode like a week ago, so I don't quite remember, but I feel like he said it in a defeated way. So it made me think that, he was also referring to himself. And I'm very, very excited to know what he's a slave to.
Yeah, and it's just another one of those things where the way it was portrayed, it's like, it makes me go,
Thinking emoji.
I know. It's like, is this some really good foreshadowing for something that's coming up?
I hope so.
All right, and then I guess we also need to talk about, speaking of Thorfinn, we cut to the boat, which used to be Thorfinn's father's boat, that he's out basically guarding for the night after this duel where he loses, and Askeladd, it's implied very heavily that Askeladd doesn't necessarily break his arm, certainly injures it in some way to where it has to be, strung up in some kind of makeshift cast. But now, I don't know whether this is supposed to be a hallucination that he's having, or if he's dreaming. But he ends up having this conversation with his father on the boat, who is
I personally, dead. It's clearly not a hallucination, but I just wrote it down as hallucination in the doc we're using. But I interpret it as a visual representation of what's going on in his mind. But I don't think he's dreaming. I think he's like mulling over it in his mind.
You think he's like in some kind of a deep thought or something?
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe. I personally think he was sleeping, but
okay.
I think he just fallen asleep. But anyway, you immediately see Thorfinn's expression and his voice soften to that of basically a young boy, and in the course of this, he reverts to his younger self as he's having this conversation with his father, and his father's like, "You really want that revenge, huh?" It's like, yeah.
I really see. Oh my god! So I really love this scene because it was so subtle. Basically, what I got from the scene is that Thorfinn is being childish by being hung up over his father. But they didn't tell us that. They showed us it. And it was such a beautiful way to show us. And like, fucking 10 minutes ago, you were telling us character motivations with the fucking money guys. So I'm like, who are these people writing this show? And like, can someone be fired and the other person take over his role? Like, I love this scene so much because so many emotions were portrayed visually. I love that Thorfinn's face after like losing the duel and just like skulking in the boat by himself was like so hardened and angry. But as soon as he saw his father, like all of his like built up like baggage that he's been carrying in his face, just it all melted away. And his voice that was like 5 octaves lower was like really, it softened up. And you could see just by that alone, like how much he's lost by being hung up over this vengeance he wants for his father. And like that, all of that is encompassed in a visual and auditory um representation of like instead of words, instead of speaking.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
I was gonna say, I also found it really like a really great, I guess you could say, extension to this scene, that he sort of snapped out of this by Lord Gorham's slave girl coming to bring him food, basically showing him some kind of a kindness, and his first instinct is to pull his dagger and put it up to her throat.
Why? Why did you find that
I
interesting?
found it to be like a really great contrast. It's like he's he's really
So
having
he's
this soft expression with his father, and then all of a sudden he snaps out of it, and his first instinct is to whoosh.
It's like, fuck my weak self. I'm gonna kill some bitches.
Yeah, it's almost like he realizes that hanging on to this is probably a weakness, but he's not ready to give it up yet.
I don't know if he realized that. I think it's meant for the audience to realize. I don't know if Thorfinn himself has realized that.
Maybe. Also, that conversation that he has with the slave girl, like right after that, where he's saying that, or he says, if you really don't like being a slave, you should just run away. And she's like, I can never run away. I couldn't get far enough away from these people. They'd come chase me and kill me. And he's like, that's why you'll always be a slave.
So who do you think is, I don't know. Who do you think has the worst mentality? I want to call him Vinland. He's not Vinland. He's Thorfinn. Thorfinn or the slave girl?
Who has the weaker mentality? Probably Thorfinn currently, because
do you honestly think that?
He refuses to give up on this thing he's hung up on.
I think a really poignant thing that the slave girl says is that Thorfinn's like, I would kill my master and run away, and the slave girl's like, I could never kill someone. And to some people that might be seen as a weakness, but I think in this specific scene, I think it's supposed to be seen as a strength, and it's a really big contrast to Thorfinn, a really big difference between them. And I think that, that specific line is supposed to say that Thorfinn has lost a lot emotionally and like personally because he chose to kill people for his own personal reasons. So
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Also, I feel like they spent a lot of time characterizing the slave girl, and that she might be coming back in a later episode.
Yeah, I think that too. I think there's definitely some foreshadowing with how much time was spent with her in this episode. Like, this is not going to be the last time we see her.
Yeah.
Speaking of not the last time, so this episode kind of ends on a cliffhanger. We find out that King Swain, I think that's how you pronounce it.
King Swiggity Swag.
Swain, Forkbeard of Denmark is preparing to launch an invasion of Great Britain, and that's pretty much what we last see. We also finally get to see the introduction of Canute, who, quite true to history, was a rather effeminate man.
That's true to history?
Allegedly, yeah. Obviously, there's no photographs of Canute, but there are many times that Canute in history has been written about. Is written about as a what's the phrase that was in that one history book I read? A man who would be comfortable amongst women.
But that could mean that he's manly, not so much.
I
don't know.
I just know that there's multiple times I've read where he's described as being somewhat of an effeminate nature.
Well, I find that very interesting because he has a very unique character design, and I'm glad that character design is justified by historical accounts.
Yes, I know for a fact that Canute had very long hair.
I see.
So,
was it straightened and conditioned?
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was straightened and conditioned. But that's pretty much how this episode ends. You get to see an awesome flying axe just mutilating people at the Battle of London. And that's kind of where the episode ends. It's kind of showing that the next episode is probably going to be about the Battle of London. So that's going to be really cool to see. It's nice that it seems, based on how this episode ended, we're going to get to some really good action-oriented episodes, which I'm hoping that's what it is. So I guess we can look forward to that.
Yeah.
So thank you all out there for dropping in to listen to us. We hope you enjoyed it, because we always enjoy bringing this stuff to you. If you want to check out previous episodes of the podcast, you can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, you can join us on Discord, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. Shoot us an email if you have any questions, or if you have ideas for topics you would like for us to talk about in the future. Links to all these things will be down below in the description. As always, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. I went through that really quickly because we went way over time with this episode. Second night show.
Now I'm gonna go have a dream about my daddy.
Oh, Jesus. I'm not even. Why do you do this? I can't believe you've done this.